Picture this. It's a Tuesday afternoon. You're sitting in one of those slightly uncomfortable plasticky recliners. The faint, sterile smell of rubbing alcohol is in the air, and there's a needle in your arm. You watch that little plastic bag slowly fill up with crimson, and honestly, you feel pretty damn good about yourself. And you should. The poster on the wall right across from you proudly declares that your single donation is going to save 3 lives. You've done your civic duty. You're a local hero. They patch you up, hand you a generic brand chocolate chip cookie, maybe a tiny plastic cup of overly sweet orange juice, and off you go. You walk out the door feeling lighter, both literally and metaphorically. But here is where the story takes a very sharp turn. You see, the second the clinic door swings shut behind you, that bag of blood you just left on the table, it stops being a heartfelt humanitarian gift. Instantly, almost by magic, it undergoes a radical economic transmutation. It becomes a commodity, a highly liquid, aggressively traded, profoundly profitable asset. We love to romanticize the human blood supply as this pure, charitable ecosystem. It feels safe to believe that. But let's take off our emotional lenses for a second and look at this like economists. What you just participated in is arguably one of the most brilliantly executed supply chain models in modern capitalism. Think about it. Where else in the entire global economy can a massive industry source its primary, absolutely essential raw material for exactly $0? It is the ultimate arbitrage. You donate the raw asset in exchange for a 50-cent cookie. But the moment that bag hits the commercial cold chain, the financial meter starts running. And the scale of this operation? It's staggering. Let's just look at the plasma sector, the so-called liquid gold of this industry. We are looking at a global market valuations currently sitting at over $30 billion. $30 billion. Entire pharmaceutical empires, complex international logistical networks, and massive corporate profit margins are entirely built on the backs of, well, your veins. Which brings us to the giant, uncomfortable elephant in the room. I want you to really think about this for a second. And drop a yes in the comments below if you or someone you know has ever had to deal with the financial shock of a hospital stay. If millions of people are giving away their biological assets completely for free, driven entirely by human altruism, why does a patient wake up to a medical bill charging them hundreds, sometimes thousands of dollars for a single transfusion, if the raw material costs absolutely nothing? Whose pockets is all that money actually flowing into? All right. Before we light our torches and start marching on the Red Cross, we need to take a step back and look at the actual market structure. Because the truth is, when we talk about the blood industry, we are actually looking at 2 entirely different economic ecosystems operating in parallel. We have whole blood, and we have plasma. And conflating the 2 is like confusing a local neighborhood bake sale with a multinational pharmaceutical merger. Let's break down the whole blood market first. This is what you normally think of, the red stuff you give at the local community drive. Now, it's absolutely true that hospitals pay for this blood, but here is where we have to be intellectually honest and look at the operational realities. Organizations like the Red Cross aren't exactly acting like greedy private equity firms here. They operate on a cost recovery model. Think about the logistics for a second. You don't just put blood in an igloo cooler and throw it in the back of a delivery van. It requires a flawless, hyper-regulated cold chain. Every single pint has to be meticulously screened in advanced labs for a laundry list of infectious diseases. You have to pay the phlebotomists, maintain specialized refrigeration infrastructure, and manage an incredibly unforgiving shelf life. Red blood cells are only viable for about 42 days. So, when a hospital pays a couple of $100 for a unit of whole blood, they aren't actually buying the blood. They are paying a processing and storage fee. They are funding the heavily regulated logistical nightmare required to get that biological asset from your arm into a surgical suite safely. Economically speaking, that fee is completely justifiable. It keeps the system afloat. But then we have the other side of the room. The spin-off product, welcome to the plasma economy. Or, as industry insiders and Wall Street analysts accurately call it, liquid gold. If you take blood and spin it in a centrifuge, the heavy red and white cells sink to the bottom, leaving a pale, yellowish, protein-rich fluid at the top. That is plasma. And from a business perspective, plasma isn't just a medical necessity. It is a highly specialized, immensely valuable raw manufacturing ingredient. Why is it so fiercely sought after? Because despite all our technological advancements, we still cannot synthesize it in a lab. Real human plasma is the absolute prerequisite building block for a lucrative category of biopharmaceuticals. We are talking about critical therapies like IVIG, intravenous immunoglobulin, for severe autoimmune diseases, specialized clotting factors for hemophilia, and treatments for severe burn victims. These are not your cheap, over-the-counter generic drugs. These are complex, high-margin, specialized therapies that can cost a single patient tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands, of dollars every single year. And this is exactly where the boundary between altruism and hardcore capitalism completely dissolves. Because the end product is a massively profitable commercial pharmaceutical. The procurement of the raw material has to be treated as a commercial enterprise. This is why you don't donate plasma in the same way you donate whole blood. You are compensated for it. You are stepping entirely out of the realm of civic duty and into a purely transactional supply chain. You become the raw material supplier, the collection center is the procurement broker, and Big Pharma is the manufacturer. It's a remarkably efficient, flawlessly executed business model. But as we are about to see, where and how they choose to source this liquid gold is where the economics start to get very, very dark. Let's play a quick game of economic trivia. If I asked you to name America's top exports, what immediately comes to mind? Commercial aircraft, right? High-tech software, weapons, maybe soybeans or crude oil. Well, you are missing one of the most uniquely lucrative, quietly booming export categories in the entire national portfolio, a biological one. When it comes to the global supply of liquid gold, the United States is quite literally the Saudi Arabia of human plasma. I'm not exaggerating for dramatic effect. Look at the macroeconomic data. The US single-handedly supplies a staggering 70% of the entire world's plasma demand. At one point, human blood products accounted for more than 2% of total US goods exported by value. We are pumping out billions of dollars of biological crude oil every single year, shipping it overseas to be refined into ultra-expensive pharmaceuticals. But as an economist, whenever you see a market share that disproportionately dominant, you have to ask, why? Are Americans just genetically blessed with superior, highly desirable blood? Hardly. Do we just have a stronger culture of civic duty than the rest of the world? Please. The real reason is a massive systemic regulatory arbitrage. It all comes down to a fundamental philosophical split in international law. Most of the developed world, especially across Europe, looks at the idea of paying cash for bodily fluids and says, absolutely not. The World Health Organization and the European Union have historically taken a very hardline stance on this. They argue that commercializing the human body is ethically compromised. It invites exploitation. So, they legally ban financial compensation for plasma. If a French or German citizen wants to give plasma, they do it out of the goodness of their heart, for free. The United States, on the other hand? We looked at that exact same ethical dilemma and said, free market, baby. America is one of the very few developed, Western nations on the planet where it is perfectly legal to hand someone a prepaid Visa card in exchange for their biological matter. And because Europe refuses to pay their own citizens for plasma, they don't collect enough to meet their own medical demands. So, they have to buy it from us. Quick pause here. I'm genuinely curious where you stand on this. Do you think it's a necessary free market solution to allow citizens to sell their plasma to meet global medical needs, or do the Europeans have it right by banning it for ethical reasons? Drop your take in the comments below. I read all of them. And hey, if you're enjoying having the economic matrix decoded for you like this, hit that subscribe button. We're just getting started. Now, if America is the Saudi Arabia of plasma, who are the oil barons drilling the wells? You might assume this massive American export industry is run by American healthcare giants. You would be wrong. This market is a textbook oligopoly, tightly controlled by three massive international titans: CSL Behring, Grifols, and Octapharma. And here is the ultimate, slightly dystopian irony of this entire economic setup. Grifols is a Spanish corporation. CSL Behring is Australian. Octapharma is headquartered in Switzerland. These are foreign companies operating in a sector where their own home countries have effectively outlawed the exact business model they use to make billions. They can't legally pay citizens for plasma in Madrid, Sydney, or Zurich. So what do? They set up thousands of extraction clinics across American soil. They tap into the US regulatory loophole, harvest the raw material from American veins, ship it out to global processing facilities, and then sell the finished, high-margin therapies back to the world, including back to the US healthcare system, at a staggering premium. It is brilliant, it is ruthless, and it is incredibly profitable. But a market this large doesn't just run on legal loopholes. It requires a steady, reliable, and highly motivated supply chain. Which brings us to the darkest economic question of all. Exactly who is sitting in those reclining chairs twice a week to keep this multi-billion-dollar machine running? All right, let's put on our CFO hats and actually do the math. Let's crack open the income statement of a human vein and look at the unit economics. Because when you map out the cash flow of this industry, the numbers are nothing short of breathtaking. Every highly profitable business fundamentally relies on widening the gap between the cost of goods sold, CGS, and the final retail price. So, what is the cost of our raw material here? If you walk into a collection center, roll up your sleeve, and sit there for an hour or two, you are going to walk out with a prepaid debit card loaded with roughly $30 to $50. Now, pause for a second. Have you ever wondered how they legally get away with this when buying human organs or tissues is strictly prohibited by US law? It's all in the phrasing. It is a brilliant, legally bulletproof linguistic dance. The industry insists vehemently that they are not buying your plasma. Oh no, the plasma is a donation. That $50 they just handed you, that is merely compensation for your time and physical inconvenience. It's a masterclass in corporate semantics. By framing the payout as an hourly wage for your time rather than a per-liter commodity price, they elegantly sidestep federal trafficking laws. But let's be real. If you show up, sit in the chair for 2 hours, but your vein collapses and you don't produce a full liter, you aren't getting paid. You are absolutely being paid for the yield. So, our base input cost is about $50 per donation. Now, let's follow that biological crude oil up the supply chain. Your plasma is frozen, shipped off, and dumped into a massive vat with the plasma of thousands of other donors. It goes through a highly complex, expensive refinement process called fractionation, where pharmaceutical companies extract the specific proteins they need. The crown jewel of these extracted proteins is immunoglobulin, which is used to manufacture IVIG therapies. What happens when that final purified IVIG vial hits the hospital pharmacy? The financial multiplier goes parabolic. A single treatment course of IVIG, which a patient with a severe immune deficiency might need every single month for the rest of their life, can easily cost them, or their insurance provider, anywhere from $10,000 to $30,000. Just absorb that spread for a moment. From a $50 prepaid card to a $30,000 medical bill. Now, to be completely fair to the pharmaceutical companies, fractionation is not cheap. Operating sterile manufacturing plants, running relentless safety assays, and navigating FDA compliance costs real money. But even after accounting for the heavy R&D and processing costs, the gross margins in this sector are astronomical. We are talking about profit margins that tech companies would envy, derived entirely from human biological matter. So, how do the Big Three oligopolies maximize this spread even further? Like any ruthless corporation, they squeeze the operational costs at the bottom of the funnel. If you look at the business model of a plasma collection center, it is run with the extreme, hyper-efficient austerity of a fast food franchise. The goal is maximum throughput. Keep the overhead low, keep the staff lean, often relying heavily on entry-level phlebotomists rather than highly paid registered nurses, and get as many donors through those doors as physically possible in a 12-hour shift. They gamify the payout system. They offer frequency bonuses to incentivize people to donate exactly twice a week, the absolute maximum legally allowed limit. They want you hooked on the cash flow. But if the industry relies on a constant, relentless volume of human bodies walking through those doors twice a week for $50 a pop, who exactly is supplying this massive volume? Where do you have to go to find a demographic desperate enough to commodify their own bloodstream for grocery money? If you want to understand the true motives of a multi-billion-dollar corporation, don't read their PR statements. Look at their real estate footprint. Every major retail chain has a hyper-specific location strategy. Starbucks looks for commuter traffic and a certain median income. Whole Foods maps out upper-middle-class zip codes. So, what exactly is a plasma collection agency looking for when they scout a new location? They are looking for economic pain. If you take a map of the United States and plot the exact locations of these extraction clinics, a very deliberate, profoundly unsettling geographic pattern emerges. You won't find these centers in affluent suburbs or gated communities. The data is incredibly clear. Over 80% of plasma clinics are strategically planted in low-income neighborhoods, Rust Belt towns, and areas crippled by high unemployment. They place the funnels right where the financial drought is the most severe. And if you want to see the absolute extreme end of this location arbitrage, you just have to look at the US-Mexico border. For years, collection centers have aggressively clustered right along the border towns. Why? Because every single week, thousands of Mexican citizens legally cross the border with temporary visas. Not to shop, not to vacation, but to sit in a chair and bleed for US dollars. It is a literal, cross-border biological supply chain, feeding off the currency exchange rate. But let's bring this closer to home, because we need to shatter a very ugly, very persistent myth about who is actually sitting in those chairs. Society loves to write off plasma donors as people on the extreme fringes, addicts, drifters, people who have completely fallen out of the system. That is factually, statistically false. Go sit in the waiting room of a clinic in Ohio, or Texas, or Florida. Do you know who you are going to see? You are going to see college students grading papers while they pump, trying to afford wildly overpriced textbooks. You are going to see single mothers calculating if they have enough time to donate before picking up their kids, just to cover a spike in their electricity bill. You will see the working poor, people who already work 40-hour weeks, sitting there with a needle in their arm just to hedge against inflation and crushing credit card debt. Welcome to the plasma economy. We have unintentionally created a shadow macroeconomic system in this country. When real wages stagnate, when rent jumps 30% in 2 years, and when a single unexpected car repair can bankrupt a family, people run out of assets to sell. So what is left? They start monetizing their own biology. It is a terrifying economic realization. For a massive, growing demographic of the working class, selling their plasma is no longer a quirky little side hustle to get some beer money. It has become a load-bearing pillar of their household budget. Without even realizing it, we have allowed the commercial harvesting of human blood to become a cruel, privatized replacement for a functional social safety net. So, after pulling back the curtain on all this corporate profiteering, what's the natural human reaction? Shut it down, right? Regulate it heavily. Ban the payments just like Europe did. Cut off the multinational titans from farming the working class. But here is the ultimate, deeply uncomfortable paradox we have to swallow as economists and realists. This industry is undeniably structurally exploitative, but it is also absolutely essential. Let's be brutally honest for a second. If you strip away the massive profit margins and the cold corporate efficiency, the core utility of this industry is keeping hundreds of thousands of people alive. Patients with severe immunodeficiencies, hemophilia, and rare autoimmune disorders literally cannot survive without these highly specialized plasma therapies. Their lives depend entirely on that biological crude oil being pumped out of those clinics every single day. If the United States were to suddenly take the moral high ground tomorrow and ban financial compensation for plasma, the global supply chain wouldn't just slow down. It would evaporate overnight. We would plunge straight into an unprecedented medical supply shock, and very sick people would pay the ultimate price. And that is the true trap, isn't it? The global healthcare system is fundamentally dependent on a business model that relies on economic despair to function, which brings us to the final reframe. The true villain of this story isn't necessarily the pharmaceutical executive buying plasma for $50. And it definitely isn't the single mom or the struggling college student sitting in the chair twice a week to keep the lights on. The real question we should be asking is this: what exactly is wrong with our underlying macroeconomic architecture? Why is the broader economy, the wealthiest engine of capital in human history, structured in such a way that millions of everyday citizens are forced to physically liquidate their own biology just to afford basic survival? The problem isn't that people are getting paid for their blood. The problem is that they need to be so. The next time you are driving down the highway and you see a brightly colored billboard featuring a smiling nurse urging you to donate plasma, save lives, take a deep breath. Acknowledge the medical truth of that statement. You are, in fact, saving lives, but never ever forget that behind that warm, philanthropic facade, a $30 billion financial empire is quietly smiling right back at you.